Savvy Central Radio, drawing out the best from our guests, with host Christina Nichman.
Savvy Central Radio is home to over 100,000 listeners per month globally and runs in syndication on 7 AM/FM platforms, including iHeartRadio and 6 podcasting platforms. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or to become a guest and find out how we can help you get your message out to the world, call 718-713-2289 or email at savvycentralradio@gmail.com. Hello everyone, and welcome to Savvy Central Radio. This is your host, Christina Nichman. Each week on Savvy, we host successful individuals and business owners, inviting them to share their dreams, stories, wisdom, and lessons learned in their field of business. Our guest today is Valerie Grosso, a former college biology professor who is passionate about making scientific concepts part of every kid's life toolkit. Valerie started BeNaturallyCurious.com and enlisted the help of several like-minded scientists who believe kids' natural curiosity and creativity can make it possible for them to grasp and internalize concepts that adults usually think are too complicated for them. Each course also incorporates a range of non-traditional teaching techniques, some of which include illustrated stories, crafts, games, experiment, and outdoor field activities. Find out more, visit BeNaturallyCurious.com. Hi, Valerie. Welcome to Savvy Central Radio. How are you? I'm so glad you can come and join us.
I'm great. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I'm excited because you have a really interesting company that helps children really get a handle on scientific issues called Be Curious, correct?
Be Naturally Curious.
Be Naturally Curious.
That natural component, yep.
Yeah, and I love that because you're, tell us a little bit about your story, what brought you to the world of science and building your company, Be Naturally Curious.
Sure. So I actually started as a research biologist.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it was in college. It was around the time of the Exxon Valdez oil spill. And one of my biology professors told me about how bacteria can eat oil for food. Wow. And I just thought that was the coolest thing ever. So I wound up studying that for my undergraduate research. And then I went on to get a PhD in that area. And then I became a college professor. So I continued to do research and I also taught. And I found that my favorite thing as a college professor was trying to teach kids, university or college students, the really tough but important concepts. And I found that much more than having them read textbooks or have me lecture, what really got them to understand things was to do sort of more non-traditional exercises. So for example, I taught biochemistry, and I would have my students act out protein motors.
Neat.
So, and they did so much better on the exams because they would remember, oh, Sally went here when Jim did this, and then John did that. And they had this visual memory of a process, which, again, they did so much better than as when they would just read that process in a textbook. So then I became a mother. I have 2 daughters of my own, and I sort of realized that the way kids are taught science, I really didn't love. And one thing in particular, I found that there were all these really cool concepts, really fundamental, which I thought they could completely get, were never taught to kids that age. And I thought if we try to teach kids using these more interesting, different kinds of approaches, we could actually teach kids early on the things that would be helpful to them as they grow, and it would give them, kids who are going to go into all kinds of areas, would give them much more of a feeling of ownership of science, and they wouldn't be scared of it anymore. And so I decided to leave academia and to start Be Naturally Curious. And so we make these, we call them mini courses. They're downloadable PDFs or printed workbooks. And each one focuses on either a really cool or really important, or both, a scientific concept. And then it's taught in the form of a story with beautiful illustrations, because a lot of kids, really appeals to them. And then we use a variety of different kinds of exercises to help them really learn it. So there's always games, there's movement-based activities, there's modeling with your hands, and there's exploration. And we really have kids come at this at one particular concept from lots of different ways. That way you get kids who are interested in all, have different ways of thinking, interested in different kinds of things. they can really grasp that concept and then have it be part of them. So that's my story.
Yeah, I love that, because I think we discussed before we had our interview together on the phone that for me in general, I'm very much a tactile learner and an auditory learner, but not a visual learner. Okay. And so most of what they teach you in school is like put it on the blackboard and maybe talk about it, but all in one way, kind of a humdrum, like put you to sleep type of thing. And I could not memorize this stuff. Yeah. So, and especially things like physics, which I truly love the concepts behind, but I could never get a handle on. Yeah. So I love that you've created science that can be understandable for all children of all ages and even adults.
It's totally for adults too. Yeah. I mean, it's easier to sort of package this for kids, but it's really also for the parents and for anybody who, yeah.
So I'm guessing not all students learn the same. This sounds like it'd be a great model to bring into the actual school system, college and otherwise.
Yeah, I think so. So absolutely, kids don't learn the same way. And I think the real key is for everything that we teach, we should really be teaching with a couple of different formats for each concept. So instead of saying, just a lecture or just read in a textbook, for that really important idea you're trying to convey, whether history or science or whatever, have the kids act it out. Have them play a game, a board game where they go through a different process. They go through different scenarios, different outcomes at each step. That slows it down. They internalize it, build models of things. And so if we teach each sort of important thing with a couple of different techniques, the likelihood is that every kid or every adult will have at least one technique that resonates with them, right? And also, there's the whole point about the greater the number of times is that you sort of approach a topic, the greater the likelihood that you'll remember it. So just by the sheer repetition of hitting a topic in multiple different ways is really powerful. For learning.
Well, that explains for me why in science arena, why I like so much biology, because it was a little bit more hands-on, and chemistry lab, because you actually had to mix the chemicals, see the results, experience it. Yeah. And I like the fact that you mentioned adding different techniques, many different techniques. And one thing I hadn't thought about is how creativity in games could actually be a method to help education, to help people learn.
Yeah, and that's one of the things is that it's the main way of learning. So play is actually the best form of learning. And as a scientist, what play really is experimenting. You think of kids doing imaginative play, they're putting themselves in scenarios and they're trying out different things and different outcomes. And it's really experimentation. So what we do in research is we sort of say, okay, we're going to design an experiment which is going to create this particular situation. Let's see what the outcome is. And it's playing. That's what playing is. And so I think if we get kids to and we actually value that for kids and say, okay, this process of playing and trying out different things and seeing what the outcomes are, and we value that. That's fantastic, because then they can take that thought process with them as they grow, and
it'll make them more well balanced. And not only that, I think if we take this into our whole society and value play and creativity in all aspects, how much better will workers be when they go to work, and employers and managers and supervisors when we come to the table and maybe even do games at work and different ways to see problems, acting it out, like you said, that could actually transform the United States and all of its industries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and I'm not trying to say that there aren't certain things that we, like certain skills and certain pieces of knowledge that we, there are certain things that we should convey, but what I think is so important, and what's not being done right now in scientific education, is what's more important. I think it's much more important to have kids fall in love with an idea. We talked about, how does an airplane fly? How does this big heavy metal thing lift off? Yeah. And if they can just really be so curious and latch onto an idea, then you show, oh, look, this scientific reasoning, this scientific process, quantitative skills, these are tools that allow me to effectively answer and investigate something I'm curious about. And instead, I think what happens is we put the cart before the horse and we say, okay, we need to learn how to take 3 measurements and average them. And meanwhile, where's the cool thing that the kid's excited about, right? We need to teach those tools to empower people to do the cool stuff and to support the ideas that they come up with during play. And so that's, I think that's what we need to bring back to sort of the elementary and middle school age kids, because actually, in our country, our universities are fantastic. We are really creative, innovative. We the rest of the world is modeling actually after us. But I think that we always say that, we're behind in math and science. But I think we're not focusing on the right thing. We are actually awesome at math and science in those aspects. But when we talk about us being behind, it's really these standardized tests that we're talking about that we give to kids. And I think we should question, is that really what we care about? And my argument would be no, we're awesome actually at a lot of things. We should just be doing that at an earlier age.
This is so intriguing. And what this brings to mind for me, and this is very interesting, I was terrible at tests. I almost failed almost all of them. And the horrible thing about it is that I was really good at science, and I really I just totally threw my teacher for a loop. I would take the test, especially science, and I would get F's and D's and whatever. And they said, but you would be far beyond. They said, your knowledge of science is that of a college student in 9th grade.
Well, that's exactly it, because you're probably making connections and finding patterns and asking questions. And again, I think most of us would probably argue that that is more important. And that's what our country comes up with all these inventions, and that's where they're coming from.
So how do you, well, here's the issue, and I think it would come up for a lot of people in the education arena. Well, we have to be able to find a way to measure and test where a student's level at different times and say, okay, you're an A student, you're a B, but is that really the most effective way to gauge? And is there another way to do that, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really the challenge, is that we have a really diverse set of students in the U.S., probably more so than most other countries that we're sort of comparing ourselves to, and that's actually awesome. I think we should stop and recognize that diversity is actually a really great thing, because it all these different viewpoints, and but then we do want kids to learn certain skills, and we want to see that they've learned it. And I think that's really the challenge, is how do we actually bring sort of a more customized education experience to individual kids? How do we actually execute that, right, in a school system? I think I think there's what's good is in recent years there's more of a focus on wanting to bring certain tools to everybody, but I think we're not quite there yet in figuring out how to do that, because certainly just a one-size-fits-all standard test is not the way to do it. But I think maybe we'll learn from that and have more nuanced ways of getting teacher input on how students are doing. And if we teach, so the way we do in the Be Naturally Curious mini course is that there you use different approaches and take notes on how students are doing, that will actually be more effective. Because really what we want is kids to be confident about their learning ability, right? That's what we want. We don't have to teach everything in the world. We just need them to feel confident.
I mean, because it's really a sad state in that I was in 9th grade in Virginia, and I think I told you during our conversation that I had severe dyslexia. So for me in school, in 9th grade, I was really reading like at a 5th grade level. It was really pretty sad. So they had actually deemed me at that time as having partial retardation. And it wasn't until another teacher said, let's do some psychological analysis, let's do some testing. And they decided, okay, after all the testing, that you have dyslexia.
Wow.
So then, they should have realized it before. But at one point, at that time in 9th grade, I was still reading really poorly. I could barely write. And one of my teachers said, well, you know what? You'll probably never learn to write then. And it's just a pretty sad state, because they were still passing me through each year. And had I not had those teachers who kept pressing to find the answer, I might have graduated not really knowing how to read or write properly. And what would that have done to my later life, trying to get a job and trying to, just live? So, I mean, it's really scary. Now, we also talked about an interesting thing. I think you've heard the Heartlight schools, where they actually use the students' basic passion to decide how to start teaching them. So say you have a passion in airplanes, the teacher would then do a curriculum specifically for that student around their interest. So if their interest was in airplanes, they would do mathematics around airplanes and stuff, and reading around that subject. Is that a possible course of action that we could take, or is that just too big on an individual level?
Well, I mean, I think they're really onto something. How exactly to execute that, say, in our public school system is something that we would have to work at, right? But I think absolutely that is a great way to go about it, because people definitely learn better when they're excited about something, right? They think it's fun and they're curious about it. And it gets to what I was saying is that if you're really excited about an idea and you want to learn more, you will want to learn those tools. You'll be hungry for learning those tools that will allow you to ask more questions, to learn more. So you'll learn those quantitative skills, the math involved in it, the history, of aviation, for example, like all kinds of things. And I think, and again, it's also just the feeling that goes along with learning, that positive feeling with learning, as opposed to a really negative feeling, that feeling of being hungry for something, right? And I think we would all agree that, when kids are older and when they go off and have careers of their own, regardless of what they do, we want them to feel like they can go do what they want to do and they can acquire whatever tools it is that they need, right? And so I think that model is really great for that. It's,
No, I get you there. And this recalls for me that when you are super excited about something, you'll want to go out and just give it your all. Yeah. Now, I know you mentioned, you were just saying before that using, going out into the field and doing that. Is that something we can bring more experiential stuff into the room again?
Oh, sure. Into the classroom, for example? Yeah. And in fact, one of my favorite things right now is something called citizen science. And it's basically where regular citizens can go and take real measurements, do real observations, and submit real data to scientists that then compile that to publish real studies. And actually, the history of this is really interesting. The first big citizen science project was the monarch butterflies back, I think, in the 60s. I'm not sure exactly. They didn't know where they went for the winter. It turns out, it's a few mountains in Mexico. But they had no idea. And so they enlisted the help of citizen scientists. And they tagged a bunch of butterflies, and they said, well, write into us, because there was no email, right? If you find a butterfly with a tag. And through that, they figured out that it was just these few mountains in Mexico. So now there are a whole bunch of really interesting citizen science projects. For example, some that focus specifically on the urban environment. I was just learning about one where they basically guide kids to look for certain species that, for example, in New York City, that they know are found in the urban environment, and kids can take notes, they can make observations, so they can explore the natural environment where they live. Totally doable, right? And they can submit that data on phones, via apps or on desktop, and they're doing real science. And then they can see the output of that, with scientists. So I think it's totally doable. And it's just a question of how do you frame, what is the field? And you need to give kids a little bit of structure, because if you say just go outside and observe stuff, they're going to be like, great,
I'm going to ride my bike. And
I think that's also the challenge. I think you want to have things be student-led, but you also need to give them enough to go with that they have, something to work with. So you need to introduce certain basic concepts and then let them run with it.
I like that you mentioned that, because that was the general feel I had heard when I asked people about the Heartlight School idea. They were like, well, I don't want to send my kid to a place where they're going to play all day long and do nothing but waste their time. I want them to really come home and learn. And the basic fear is that if we just let them do whatever the heck they want, they'll play their video games all day long. But then the other thing you mentioned that I found interesting is that if we're at school all day long doing the normal structure in the square, as it were, you feel kind of bored. You don't feel any passion for it. And so what you're mentioning here, by going out there and doing the experiments and stuff and being a citizen scientist, that actually brings the passion back into it. Now, incorporating it maybe into literature and such, and maybe other topics, I'm not sure how about that would go around. But I think, just as you said, just bringing in the creativity and games can just be a good start for all the different topics.
I think so, in terms of how our brains work. I think that's sort of a fundamental thing. In terms of sort of going by what students are interested in, right now at regular school, we tend to march through curricula. So it's like one thing after the next, get to the next thing, get to the next thing. And I think that is a big defining feature right now of education, is how much can you get through in a certain amount of time. And I think there isn't, what I think works better is if you say, okay, here's an idea. Let's sit with it for a minute and really think about it and, get into it. And and again, that gives different kids who have different skills, ability to explore it in their way, as opposed to just going from one thing to the next, where it just sort of goes in one ear and out the other. And so, because we're never going to teach them everything, right? And what's much better is to show them a way to learn that they can then take with them, so that they can continue to learn on their own. So I think it's a little bit of a mistake, I feel like, to say, oh, we're behind. We have to get through, this historical event by the end of, grade 9, kind of thing. So
yeah, it's true, because then it puts you in a box and it's like, oh my gosh, we didn't finish that, so now you're not complete.
And meanwhile, you've rushed through everything, so kids haven't really,
internalized.
Yeah, exactly, digested any of them.
Actually, when I had finished, I think it was 10th or 11th grade, we played trivia with my entire family, my mom, my dad, and I got most of the questions right because I'm in school and we're doing a lot of these subjects. My parents didn't know any of it and that's the sad part. Is it really education? If you're getting all the knowledge but it's going in one ear and out the other, you want to find a way to build on a foundation where you've learned a way to learn that you can incorporate it, learn it, and keep it for the rest of your life and continue to use those skills to learn other things.
Yep. And I feel, as a scientist, there are certain things in science where I feel that is so important. Certain core concepts like molecules. Okay, so actually, what's interesting is that there are now released something called the Next Generation Science Standards from the National Science Foundation, and it's actually a pretty enlightened set of concepts they think kids should learn, as opposed to certain sort of reading skills by a certain age. It's just, here are some concepts. And one of the things they suggest early on is molecules. And I think there are a lot of teachers who understandably are like, how the heck am I going to be teaching, first graders about molecules? Yeah. But it is such a fundamental concept. And when kids ask, what are things made of? We always say wood, metal. Well, they're made of different little things. And so, for example, I think if you use more non-traditional teaching techniques and kids like cut out little atoms and they glue them together, you can actually make a little tangible project for them to understand these very basic concepts to take with them.
This is something that intrigued me at 10 years old. How do you make the concept understandable of, because my science teacher said most of everything is actually air, not even molecules. How do you make that concept known to a child when it looks like everything is hard? Right. It's really bizarre.
Right. Well, yeah, I think you say things like, oh, anything that you can feel is molecules. In fact, air is made up of actually molecules because you can feel it. And actually, I say this in the airplane science course as we have them wave their hands around. So there are molecules, and we sort of say, oh, and most of them are this kind and that kind, so they can sort of start to imagine it. And kids have great imaginations. So we always say, oh, kids can't learn that. And they can. They can draw it. They can imagine it. They can cut things out. So
I drove my science teacher crazy when I was like, well, what does nothing look like?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, really, nothing is up, so I drove him a little batty. It was kind of a philosophical question. We went into another arena.
Right. Well, those are the big questions, though, and I think that's where teachers say, look, you're asking an amazing question. These are things that scientists think about. What does nothing look like? I mean, so it's sort of, I think, giving kids credit for, like, you're doing really important stuff.
Yeah, my teacher was kind of like, you need to stop talking about it. We need to move on.
Well, that's, at the end of a long day, I guess that's probably.
Yeah, but I remember us also mentioning, and I thought this was very important, that how many parents are stressed out of their skull based on our society's idea we have to push as much information at as early an age as possible. So we have like 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, we're trying to cram reading books down their throat and get them reading and getting them learning their multiplication tables. And parents are stressed. I'm not keeping up with other parents. And by the time they go to school, they got to be completely literate and know all their functions in math. Is this really the best way to go about things, or what do you think?
No, I mean, I think it isn't. I mean, I don't blame parents. I mean, I'm a parent myself, and I see it. I mean, there's enormous pressure, and you want to do good by your kid. So I totally, don't blame parents, but it's a shame because, again, as a biologist, one of the core tenets of biology is there's diversity. Even within, a single species, every organism is a little different from every other one. And of course, kids are, has nothing to do with intelligence, are going to be, in slightly different places at different times. So to sort of impose this sort of artificial timeline that you have to be reading by kindergarten, which is really, they've sort of pushed everything up, is arbitrary. And so then the question is, well, from the public school system, how do they actually execute and bring about any kind of sort of accountability? And that's a tough question. And I think, we have to be careful how we go about it, because we want it to do, we want to do right by the kids, right?
Yeah, but leaving out the stress on the parents, because my one friend, God bless her, she is stressing herself out of her mind, trying to get her kids to learn everything by the time they even go to school, so that she can feel like a good mom and not feel behind other parents.
Right.
And it's really a lot of stress for the parents, all the parents, and a lot of stress for the kids who are like, I'm not interested in sitting here for 10 hours looking at multiplication tables or whatever.
And I mean, it's the opportunity cost. It takes away from playtime. And I think that is the biggest tragedy of it. Is
and quality time together.
And quality time together. And the emotional part of doing fun things together, right? And since we've talked that I really think that's one of the most important things you can do is sort of the play and that curiosity and that sort of following up on things. The fact that you're taking it away at a key age where that's really the time where you should have the most flexibility to do that. Yeah. That's probably the biggest tragedy of that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's very sad. But I'm hoping more parents listening to this will start to engage and think of different ways that they can connect with their kid, maybe learn mathematics and other things in a more fun, playful, adding game-oriented type thing.
Oh, yeah. And I think I'm really impressed with parents out there. So my daughters go to public school, but I've met a number of homeschool parents who are really just doing awesome things with their kids. And they basically said, I think this is better for my kid. And they're doing all these more creative things. And I think you really see, different kinds of schools and homeschooling families. And I think it's neat that we have that in our country, that you have, and again, brave parents who are just sort of saying, hey, you know what, this is not right for my kid. I'm going to do this instead.
Yeah, and I know there's a lot of components or opponents, I should say, who are against the idea of homeschooling kids because are they really getting the necessary education and stuff? Right. So there's a lot of that fear going on. But I think it's tremendous because it allows you to connect with your kid even more because you are the educator, and at the same time you're learning as an adult, and it gives an example to the kid how important education is when you're part of the whole process.
Absolutely. And I mean I've been super impressed by what I've seen, and I think it's situation and person and kid dependent, right? And I think, and again, that's what's so interesting about our country, I think, is that we allow that. We're not saying in this respect, we're not enforcing, one size fits all. In that respect, we're saying, okay, there may be different ways, different things that are better for different families and different kids at different times. And you don't have to be just homeschool or just public school. You may do a little both. Or so it's interesting. I think there's a lot of things being done right now, and we'll see.
It's exciting.
Yeah, it is exciting.
A new frontier.
Yeah.
But before we head on out here and end our interview together, I want you to let everyone know where they can find out more about you and your business.
Sure, yeah. So our website is www.benaturallycurious.com. We have our downloadable mini courses. We also have printed mini courses on Amazon, and we also have a great Facebook group if you're interested in sort of science education and posts on that. And we'd love to connect with people who are excited about science education.
Awesome. And what would be your final words of advice to parents, educators, to politicians in the world of education in our country, and what we could do to better it?
I mean, I think, again, as a scientist, to model curiosity, I think we don't do that enough. Verbalize. When you're excited about something, curious about something, say that and follow up with your questions, how you're going to figure something out, and model that kind of thinking. And kids will see that, and they'll also see that you're excited about it, because I really believe that curiosity brings joy, and that's for my kids, that's what I would like them to do.
That's fabulous. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And for any teachers out there, even if you're stressed, don't ask that question. Say, we'll get to that next time. But thank you for being curious.
Exactly. Great question. It's like the best line.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So everyone, please go to Be Naturally Curious today and find out more about Valerie's wonderful products. Thank you, Valerie, for coming to Savvy Central Radio.
Thank you so much.
Savvy Central Radio is home to over 100,000 listeners per month globally and runs in syndication on 7 AM/FM platforms, including iHeartRadio and 6 podcasting platforms. To find out about our paid sponsorship opportunities or to become a guest and find out how we can help you get your message out to the world, call 718-713-2289 or email at savvycentralradio@gmail.com.